Today we're going to discuss a subject that you're very familiar with, a subject in which you're an expert, because you're experiencing this right now.
What we are experiencing is broadcasting. I'm Jim Kircher, and when he did his show in this very same studio decades ago, television was brand new. Today, with all the equipment, all the improvements, we can do so many things. But technology, that's never really been the problem in this business. In fact, the day they turned on that first radio transmitter in St. Louis, they had more stuff than they knew what to do with. They had the sky itself to fill with invisible waves, and they had an endless amount of time.
From the Boulevard Room of the Jefferson Arms, it's time for the Playhouse Party. And now here's your host, St. Louis's musical master of ceremonies, Russ David.
You don't have to go way back in time to hear and see what radio must have been like in the earliest days. More than a half-century after he got into the business, Russ David, with help from singer Dottie Bennett, was still at it. Basic, simple, entertaining radio.
I can only give you country walks in springtime and a hand to hold when leaves begin to fall, and a love whose burning light will warm the winter's night. That's all, that's all.
Russ David would have been an entertainer, a musician in any age. It just so happens that when he got into the business in the 1930s, radio had become the place to do it.
Old Judge, America's quality coffee, presents the Charlie Ackerson Show with the Old Judge song maids, Russ David and his orchestra, and starring Charlie Ackerson.
So wrap your troubles in dreams and dream your troubles away.
Just as it was changing so many things, radio was changing music and the way we listened to it.
That's how the big band started, don't forget, the radio. Of course, there were a lot of theaters in those days. Right here we had an orchestra, the Ambassador, the Missouri, the Fox, the Orpheum. Live musicians, you know, in all of these places. But the solid job and the highest paying job were in the studios, especially the network affiliates like CBS. That's where I first went to work. And radio was the place you wanted to be.
When television came along, it was one more place to work. So Russ David rolled his piano and his talent in front of a camera at the studios of KSD-TV, the first and for years the only station in town. The old and the new pictures of Russ David remind us that the technology changes, it improves, but somebody still has to be doing something to make it worthwhile.
Thank you.
From the very beginning, the broadcast technology always came first, followed by the question, now what? When wireless communications first came to St. Louis, the technology was definitely the attraction. At the 1904 World's Fair, people came to see what the world was coming to, and inventor DeForest was there to show them. Using his improvements in wireless technology, he was sending messages to cities hundreds of miles away. What were the messages? Who knows? Who really cared? It was DeForest's tower that drew the crowd. The hums and crackles of his electronic gizmos were more impressive to the gathering crowd than anything he had to say to the receiving station in Chicago. Soon the dots and dashes were replaced by human voices, and now all America could listen in to all kinds of messages.
Son, I want to compliment you. This is the first time you've come to the dinner table with hands that really look clean. What's behind your sudden reform?
Well, John, I don't think it's the boy that is reformed, it's me. A new soap that I bought today taught me that with most soaps, children cannot get their hands clean. But this new soap, Trilby, whisks the dirt off like magic. Doesn't it, Junior?
I'll say it does, Mother. And believe it or not, Dad, I like to wash with Trilby.
You mothers with an active boy on your hands must expect him to get dirt on his. But Trilby will completely solve the problems of getting the dirt off and of getting the boy to do it without constant urging and scolding. Trilby lather springs into life instantly, cleans quickly. Your boy will like to use it, just as you yourself will prefer it to any soap that ever has been in your bathroom. Your grocer has Trilby, spelled T-R-I-L-B-Y. Ask him for it today.
In the days before radio, if you wanted to be heard by as many people as possible, well, you know the saying, you'd shout it from the rooftops. But then when the radio stations started putting their transmitters and their antennas up here, well, you could whisper from the rooftops and you'd be heard all over town, all over the state. On a good night, you might be heard halfway around the world. At St. Louis University, there was another reason to put the radio on the roof. That's where the weather forecasting equipment was. And a wireless transmitter was put up in 1912 to send out forecasts for the U.S. Weather Bureau. One of the meteorologists turned radio technician was, if not the father, then certainly the brother of St. Louis radio, Brother George Ruppel. In 1921, he was broadcasting on the university's experimental radio station 9KY, which was licensed the following year as WEW, St. Louis's first, along with KSD and WIL. It is said that when Brother Ruppel ran out of things to say in those early days, he'd set the microphone in front of the Victrola, making him St. Louis's first disc jockey. But what early radio really needed was more people. People who could step in front of the microphone and do something.
I used to yodel.
At KMOX, see, we had no records, or nobody had records, or no tapes, nothing like that. So KMOX had two organists, two gals, by the name of Margot Clark, and then later on we got a fellow in there, Ken Wright. Then we had Benny Fell's big orchestra, which full-time, big stuff. And the rest of the time, I don't remember just how they did kill the time through the day. Well, we had that organ played nearly all day long. I mean, it was, we didn't have no talk shows then either. And as I look back, radio must have been pretty dull, but it was new, and nobody knew any better.
Oh, for years and years I've rambled, drink my wines and gamble.
In 1929, radio was already big, but still young, and a 16-year-old kid from Pilot Knob, Missouri could hop a freight to the big city, show up at KMOX radio with a guitar, and practically walk right into the studio. This sort of amateur show was great for early radio. It filled the time, and it helped feed radio's tremendous appetite for new talent.
So I walked in that morning, and there's a lot of people with audition, but I was the only one with a guitar and a yodel. There were the piano players and imitators and singers and dancers and everything like that. He would come around, and he'd just take her name, like Roy Queen, and here was Bill Jones on the piano, and so, and he just lined them up. Then we went down the line, and I think I was about, I think about the fifth on the, and they put us on the air, and some of them was lousy, and some of them was lousier. Somehow, I can't give up my good old rambling ways. Oh, the railroad trains are calling me away.
Roy's rendition of Rough and Rowdy Ways got him a regular job and a new nickname, the Lone Singer. The kid from Pilot Knob, who never before had performed before any more people than could fit into a barn, now had his voice carrying over half the country. For an entertainer, There truly had never been anything in the history of the world like radio.
And I pulled into Fort Worth. This is where I found out that we had coverage. I pulled into Fort Worth, and I had right on the back Roy Queen, the lone singer, KMOX, St. Louis. The guy there at the filling station, I stopped in to get gasoline and get a drink soda. And he said, "You Roy Queen?" "Yeah." "Well," he said, "we listen to you all the time." I'll say 2 hours after I landed in Fort Worth, I was on the Southwest Network with W. Leo Daniels' Light Crust Doughboys.
It was steady work on the road and in the studios. In 1935, Roy Queen was back in St. Louis on KMOX.
You'll have a home, babe, as long as I've got mine. The grip left over from me father's mustache cup. Roy Queen. Now, Roy. You tell him, Kathy. You got the grounds. Ad-libbing again, ad-libbing. Say, what in the world have you got here with you this morning? I want you to know, my friend, that I was down at Pilot Knob yesterday, and I brought back my famous cornfield canaries with me. Yeah, with my rainwater trio, Drip, Drop, and Droop. Rainwater trio, you say? Yeah. Say, Roy, there's only two that sing. You call them a trio. Well, you see, I was meant for twins. They just forgot to divide me. Yeah.
By the 1930s, radio had come of age. They were now doing complex productions that used this medium to its fullest potential. In a studio like this, you might find the actors gathered around the microphone with their scripts. Over in the corner, a sound effects person, and an organist, even a full-fledged orchestra to provide the moods and the transitions. And yet, coming out of the speaker was a single unified product that created a whole world inside of your head.
Now it's the next night. The scene, the living room of the Brown farmhouse.
I could break right down and cry. I'm that disappointed.
Gee, sis, crying won't help. Cheer up. We aren't the only family in the world without an oil well.
Oh, it was too good to be true.
As you were working, I think the big fear, and I know this sounds ridiculous, was that you didn't cough while the other people were performing at the mic, you know. So that was terribly important, you know, that peace and quiet in the studio while you were emoting.
Ellen Wallach was a young actress in the days when there was plenty going on in St. Louis on the stages and in the radio studios.
The Tom Mix Ralston Straight Shooters bring you action, mystery, and smile-a-minute thrill. Tonight you're about to hear the first episode in a new and baffling mystery, the Storybook Mystery.
When the Tom Mix Show, a Ralston-Purina-sponsored cowboy program, did some shows in St. Louis, Ellen Wallach was hired, in part because she could do an English accent.
And then the other requirement of me was that I had to scream. Well, heaven knows I'm a great screamer. So the part was mine.
The land we live in.
This long-running local show based on St. Louis history was performed every week, and every element was live.
Mr. Robine, if you will pardon me, please, I must make an announcement. Please, stop the music.
Ladies and gentlemen, I regret interrupting the program, but the Economy Dry Goods store across the street is on fire. And all members of the volunteer fire department are asked to report there immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, please, if all the firemen are gone, with your permission, the program will now continue. Mr. Robine, if you will, well, where is Mr. Robine?
Hey, Jake, who's that bird helping with the fire hose?
Which one, Harry?
Oh, that gazebo up in front with the full-dress suit on.
Oh, him. I don't know his name. Somebody says he's a piano player from across the street.
Broadcasting had come a long way from its early days, but then 25 years after it started, it was time to start all over again on TV. The man who brought television to St. Louis was Post-Dispatch and KSD radio executive George Burbach, who had seen a television demonstration in London in 1936 and went to work to bring it home. When the war was over, the Post-Dispatch was in the front of the line. The paper put KSD Channel 5 on the air in 1947. Keith Gunther was one of those who was hired to figure out just what to do with it.
The primary consideration is how we were going to fill the time that we had indicated on the so-called program schedules, and pulling together events, something as simple as a fashion show. It was a constant struggle to come up with material to put in front of that camera. It was all live, nothing recorded.
One popular television special was coverage of the Veiled Prophet Ball and Parade, a St. Louis broadcasting staple since early radio. Channel 5's coverage was even carried on the NBC television network. Before this, back in 1946, KSD conducted an experimental broadcast of the Veiled Prophet pageantry. It was viewed by Post-Dispatch executives and a group of people in an auditorium. It was not, however, St. Louis's first look at television. KWK Radio had conducted a demonstration in 1932. There was another preview in 1939, when Kay Morton was just getting started in her radio career.
I was still on WTMV then in 1939. I think it was Dumont, rather than, yeah, it was Dumont, did a demonstration of live television at the auditorium in Famous Bar, and those of us who were in the broadcast business were asked to come over, and we had to wear purple lipstick, but it was interesting. And then they broadcast into the auditorium from the stage of Famous Bar.
In 1947, when KSD-TV officially went on the air, it was once again the radio performers, like singer Dottie Bennett, who got the call.
I was the first woman on television in 1947. February, it was February of 47, and there were three of us. There was Frank Eschen, who's since deceased, and Don Ward from Chicago, and myself, and we walked up and down Olive Street. It was called a Man on the Street show because there were no, shows per se. We just sort of walked up and down and asked different people what they thought of television, and of course, they couldn't give very concise answers. Nobody had a receiver.
1 hour and 20 minutes of television, broadcast, it is said, to a grand total of 4 television sets in St. Louis. Since nobody could build these things at home, like they could those first radios, KSD and its performers weren't just doing television, they were promoting it. That was one of Harry Gibbs' jobs before he became better known as Texas Bruce.
Most of the TV sets in the town were in department store windows and in appliance dealers' stores. And Union Electric had and still does have a big stake in anything that uses that much electricity, obviously. So they wanted to provide something for the appliance dealers that they could show people, something besides a test pattern. So what they did, the appliance dealer would have what they called a party. They would invite people, customers, former customers, customers they hoped they'd have, to this gathering at the appliance dealer's store. And then at a specific time, Dottie and I'd call them and we'd do this quiz show. There may have been other people watching, but this was beamed specifically to that appliance dealer at the store.
Steve, where you at, Steve? Steve, where's Steve? What are you doing down there?
Well, I was measuring this box to make sure it's a true 20 cubic foot box.
We'll do this commercial.
All right. When the Mizraenis tell you something, it's so.
It wasn't worth it for Steve Mizraeni to do television commercials until enough people had the TVs to watch him.
I used to go door to door selling them. I get on a streetcar and go door to door to try and sell them. We had to go around. We went to taverns and start selling TV then. The taverns were for sports and that, and we sold TVs, and we had to put an outdoor antenna up. We had to do things like that, to get the guys interested in TV.
Wrestling was on television from the very start. With your first audience sitting in taverns, it was just the thing. There were other advantages that kept it on the air for decades. Technically, it's easy to do. The action's centered in a small area, the performers are already there, and it uses up lots of airtime. Joe Garagiola was one of the early wrestling announcers for St. Louis television, and promoters like Sam Muchnick found that the economics of television sports put the paying spectators into the background, almost as a prop.
I made a deal with KSD, and I was on with them from 53 to 55. We ran the shows at a place on Lafayette near Jefferson called the St. Louis House. We had about 1,500 people, but we weren't there to make money on the attendance, but it looked good to have a full house. Television was the answer to the growth of wrestling and boxing as a big sport. I think it wouldn't be for television, basketball, baseball, football would not be as big as they are today.
Dan, first, congratulations on that 3,000 hit. I imagine you feel wonderful.
Well, it's really a great feeling, and really overwhelmed with this terrific turnout.
I bet you are at that. Dan, what did you think about after having sat out?
It really wasn't all that long ago when if you wanted to follow the ball game, you had to be at the ballpark. But now, we've been watching baseball on the little screen for so long that when we get to the stadium, we're not sure where to look because television's been doing the looking for us, and it's really not very good at giving us the big picture. Well, if we're just talking about baseball, big deal. But if television has done the same thing to our ability to view and understand our community, or even the world, well, that's a whole new ballgame. Back in the 20s, people knew broadcasting was going to change things. They just weren't sure how. At the ballpark, the Cardinals owners didn't want anything to do with radio. They wanted fans watching from the stands, not listening at home. Sam Muchnick was a young sports writer when radio was just trying to get in.
It was just in its infancy. Thomas Patrick, his real name Thomas Convey, at KWK, he was doing some ball games. And the way I understand, they wouldn't let him there for a while, and he went and he got to the top of the roof at the YMCA building on Grand Avenue where he could overlook the center field stands and see what's going on the ball field, and he did a few games from there.
A lot of teams wouldn't allow all their games to be broadcast because they were afraid it would hurt the live gate too much. They didn't realize until a few years had gone by that that constant presence of a broadcast was the best sales tool that you could possibly have.
When radio did get into the ballpark, there were no exclusive broadcast rights. Any station could come in and do the games without paying anything. One of the first sportscasters was KMOX announcer Franz Laux, who goes back to the era of Ruth and Gehrig and did some World Series games for the network.
Deep to right field, it's bouncing off of the screen out there. Medwick racing for second base. He's rounding second. He's going to try for three. Here comes the throw. It's going to be close. Medwick slides. Safe. Oh, wait a minute. Marvin Owen claims that Medwick spiked him and the boys are into a fight. Here comes the players charging out from both teams. Looks like we have the makings of a good free-for-all here. And now the umpires are moving in, trying to get the boys quieted down.
Muchnick misses the style of the old-time announcers.
Right now, if you listen to the broadcast, sometime you'll hear a young announcer say, well, I think he's going to bunt right now, or they're going to try the hit and run. Well, he's guessing. Of course, if he doesn't have to apologize to anybody if he's wrong, but a lot of them try to run the ball game from their booth instead of letting the manager run it. But in those days, the announcer just told what was happening on the field.
2 balls, 2 strikes. Cardinals lead 1-0.
Not everyone was content with the announcing of the 1930s. A young St. Louisan named Harry Carabina was one of them.
So when I went to the ballpark, I'd see an exciting game. When I listened, it didn't seem as exciting. So I came to the conclusion either that the announcers really didn't see what I saw in the ball game and therefore weren't as excited, or that maybe I was just lucky enough to go only when they had an exciting game. Well, good reason and logic seemed to argue against that. So I came to the conclusion that maybe I saw a game differently than they did.
He said, I'm at the game, it's more exciting than the broadcast. Harry wound up turning it on its ear because 2 generations of Cardinal fans said, at least occasionally, you know what? I listen to these games in Joplin or who knows where, Blue Springs or someplace, for years and years, and I finally went to a game, and the game I saw wasn't anywhere near as exciting as the game Harry Carey broadcast.
Pitch to Musial. A hot shot on the ground into right field, a base hit. Here's thrown around third. Here's a no throw. The Cardinals lead 1-0. Listen to the crowd.
The fans are still coming from Joplin and Blue Springs, still coming from Arkansas and Oklahoma and beyond, where generations of Cardinals fans listened late into the night to their team. Radio had a major impact on sports, but perhaps nowhere quite the way it did on St. Louis and its Cardinals.
Cardinal situation was, if not unique, pretty close to unique. The southernmost and westernmost franchise, I guess. Certainly the westernmost franchise until the Dodgers and Giants go to California in 1958. And with KMOX as the flagship station, you got a 50,000 clear channel, 50,000 watt clear channel station booming out all over the Midwest, a station which by itself on a clear night can be heard in 30, 35 states. And then you've got a large regional network, who knows how many stations, 100, 150, whatever. It was the team of the region. It didn't hurt that at the time that radio was first becoming a daily part of baseball, the Cardinals were a great, great team. The Cardinals of the 1940s are one of the great teams in baseball history and one of the colorful teams. And even though the Cardinals in the 50s didn't win any pennants, they did have Stan Musial, and they had Harry Carey and Jack Buck in the same booth, particularly at that time Harry Carey, who was, you know, a baseball Barnum kind of, you know, just tub thumping while he was broadcasting.
And you know, now people wonder whether it's WGN-TV Channel 9 because of the Superstation, whether that's had something to do with me being so known across the country. And I say, hey, they used to listen to me in the South, Southwest, Far West, all over the country, over 185 radio stations, when there wasn't even any television at all.
Television did show up at the ballpark, of course, and would have an even greater impact than radio. But it, too, started simply.
We did baseball games. We did St. Louis Browns baseball games, Cardinal baseball games, and we did a great many of them, frequently on a daily basis. So this provided a big hunk of programming, so to speak.
Those early telecasts were nothing like today's, which require an army of technicians and enough cameras and equipment to supply that first TV station several times over. Gunther worked with just 2 cameras, and he sat right between them, directing the shots. The TV rights, the price of admission.
Oh, the ball clubs were naive about television, and we moved into the stadium, and if the story goes that we were charged for 2 box seats, which amounted to about $5 or $10 a game. Well, you know what the television rights are today.
Network television deals, unbelievable salaries, restructuring the leagues to get more playoff games. It all comes from broadcasting, which no longer simply observes and reports the action on the field.
It'll never come again. Some of it was inevitable. Society changes. Television is different than radio. Money corrupts to a certain extent. Some of it was inevitable. But some of it is just a gratuitous trashing of what makes the game worthwhile. And therefore, you can't broadcast with the same honest sentiment as you used to be able to.
If you think I have stuff, wait till Jack here tells you about the swell polo shirts with me and Paul's pictures and autographs right on the front of them.
Thank you, Dizzy Dean. Say, boys, you can get genuine polo shirts just like Dizzy wears. They're keen. Hurry. Get your mother to buy some.
If broadcasting is corrupting things, it's been at it a long time. Radio was always a sales tool even before there were commercials. It promoted a hotel and its ballroom and orchestra, or the newspaper that owned the station. And once commercials started, they were everywhere.
Light up a tall Moore cigar. 5 cents for your pleasure. And for the day's doings, listen to the Tall Moore Smoke Ringer tomorrow night at this time. Until then, good night, good news, and good smoking. This is KMOX, the voice of St. Louis.
Thank you, Joe. That was a real busy arrangement, wasn't it? You know, they say that one picture is worth 1,000 words. So today, instead of telling you about the truly superb meats featured at all Tri-City food stores, I'm going to show you.
Whatever you did in radio or early television, you always paused for a word from the sponsor. And you were especially in demand if, like Russ David, you could sell it yourself.
You know something? I wish you could see this uncooked Tri-City steak in color. See the rich, fresh red of the meat, the snowy whiteness of the even rim of fat, and the almost invisible veins of marbling that assures butter-like tenderness.
In early television, the spots were live, and as much work went into them as the rest of the show. If the host didn't do the commercial, a staff announcer or a local actor did. But then somebody came in and broke that rule, and just about all the others.
All right, then let's give a listen to Steve Miserini right over here. Steve?
I want to say hello to my good friend, Dr. Carney, Joseph Carney. Thanks, Doc, for taking care of me. Did you say you got a low price? I'm talking about you guy that walks around and says, well, Miserini don't give a low price. I can get it wholesale.
We were the very first guys to make their own commercial. Am I right, George?
Yes, I'll add one thing.
Miserini was already sponsoring radio shows and moved right into television, with his friend George Edick as producer.
When I first started with Steve, I tried to make a regular announcer out of him, like the regular announcers were that day. So I took Steve and he studied scripts, and I says, well, Steve, when you try this script, just I'll give you a script, you hold it low, I'll have the camera come in on a close-up on you, and you look down and you look at that script and read it, and kind of look up at the camera and so forth and read the commercial. Well, he got about halfway through that commercial, and he just backed up away from the camera, threw the thing out of the way, and he says, I can't follow this script. Nobody can tell me how to sell appliances. We know appliances better than they. We've been selling them for years. And then he went around to the ice boxes and so forth and slamming doors shut and this and that. And that's the way he did it.
It was all live.
It was all live, and that's the way he did it.
I'm a ham, you know, and I was a ham from the beginning, so I just got up there and whatever it was going to work. I figured they were going to kick me off, so. Well, they kicked us off one time when we caught the studio on fire, but we got back on again.
Porcelain top and everything. I want to show you, I'll light it up, and it's something, look at that. It's all porcelain, and it's showing you that this porcelain, it'll last. Detergent or anything won't eat through it. Isn't that something getting too big there, George? Put it out. Wait a minute. Nice. Boy, that's hard. Look at that. Cleaned away.
That's all it was. Track the attention, let them know that we're in the appliance business, and we was very fortunate, thanks be to God, that we did fabulous business. We really did.
It has aluminum shelves on the door, a 125-pound freezer. 5 seconds. This here one, $279.95, and I'll finance it for you.
There are no trays to fill, empty, or spill. This gas refrigerator gives you all the ice you want.
Unlike Steve Miserini, most TV sponsors thought it was better to stick to a script and to change with the times.
It's a happy turned-on world. Turned-on world.
Making commercials had become a business unto itself. It was freed from the confines of the live studio performance to become a film and later a videotape production. We now rarely have a chance to see just what a live television commercial can be in the right hands.
Hey, how about a cold glass of light-hearted Falstaff right now? All you need is a glass and a tall, frosty bottle of light-hearted Falstaff. Then pour the Falstaff right into the glass. It's the beer that goes so well with your lighthearted living.
At Channel 4 in the 1950s, first when it was KWK-TV and then KMOX, Tom Lewis was becoming a master of the soft sell. Like Steve Mizraini, he was so good at doing things his way, they threw away the script.
The Falstaff commercials were the unique ones because they were original. It wasn't long before, don't forget, our client was here in St. Louis and could see all of the commercials. Before I got the word, we're going to let you ad-lib these commercials. I was ad-libbing more and more each time. It wasn't long before I got a copy that came from Dancer Fitzgerald Sample in New York that said, Tom Lewis ad-libs for 1 minute. And that was my heyday, because every night we did something different. It's always with a little bit of humor, or something very romantic, or something that touched home.
I think I'll enjoy a tall, frosty glass of light-hearted Falstaff.
Tom Lewis was doing more than commercials. He was doing television, experimenting with its potential, and having fun doing it.
Well, why don't you join me in pouring yourself a glass? I'll pour mine, let's say right here, okay?
There's light-hearted living in light-hearted...
That was very successful. We only did it once. All of these commercials we only did one time. And don't forget, most of them were live before videotape. All of them were live before videotape. So if we wanted to do one of these tricks, we had to do it live.
Lewis finally gave up advertising Falstaff. He'd become so identified with the product that other sponsors wouldn't hire him. No matter that he wasn't even a beer drinker. People believed what they saw. Television could do that.
7 bells, it's time for...
The SS Popeye sails again with a full cargo of cartoon fun and your pals Cookie and the Captain. Brought to you by your favorite, the self-service Hill Brothers Shoe Stores. Now, where's Cookie?
Here I am, Captain. Ah,
How
say.
about that, huh?
You're all set now for your jockey lessons?
Television brought something new. These performers were not just characters created by voice and sound effects. These were real people, or so it seemed, and not just on television, but at personal appearances all around the area. For Cookie, Jim Bolin, that's when the impact of this new medium really hit home.
We didn't have daily ratings like we do now. They sent me out on a personal appearance to a park in North St. Louis to see what kind of response we would get. And 3,500 kids showed up, screaming and yelling and wanting me to sign in. You know, I was amazed. And the station was too.
Harry Gibbs, as Texas Bruce, was St. Louis's first big kiddie show host. He really could ride and rope, and that put him in great demand for parades and other appearances.
We had actually a converted milk truck, and I'd sit over here on the right, and the old horse was facing out this way, and they'd come in, shake hands, get their souvenir picture, pet the old horse's nose, and go out the other side. So I would say maybe from probably April through October, but in that 1 year, we counted 300,000 kids that went through that van, shook hands, howdied, and talked, and it was quite an experience.
All right, here we go.
Part of the job on the air was to sell things to all those children. And Texas Bruce didn't always like what he saw, and he let the kids and the sponsors know it.
I remember, just as an example of the kind of thing that aggravated people I worked for, we had a toy. It was an old magician's bottle. It was like a nursing bottle, so that it looked like, if you tip it up like that, it would look like someone was, and the dolly was drinking the milk, okay? Guaranteed safe. One of the engineers told me, he said, hey, he says, I don't know if that's so safe or not. I said, what do you mean? He said, I happened to drop one. He said, it busted all over the place. Okay, we'll do that on camera. So we did. I said, okay, kids, they say this thing is safe. Look at here. Whammo. Okay, you buy it, your mom buys it, be careful.
Any story about Texas Bruce has to include the famous one about the boy who, it is said, flashed an obscene gesture at the camera with the words,
"This is for you, Herbie." I didn't see it. I don't think it happened. And it's been told various ways, like we went to black and we came back, the kid was gone, you know, those wonderful things. But it's great to meet people that remember, and I guess this will last me the rest of my life.
He went on the air as Texas Bruce in 1950 on Channel 5 and stayed for the next 13 years. In '58, Jim Bolin and Dave Allen started a 9-year run on Channel 4 as Cookie and the Captain.
Just go like that. Huh? Okay, pal. Now.
Cookie and the Captain was a pure accident. When CBS bought this station, they acquired a library of Popeye cartoons that had never been seen in St. Louis, and they didn't know what to do with them. Luckily, I came that one summer of '58. Dave Allen had been here for some years, and they looked at the size of the two of us, and we were both jovial and funny, and Dave could write well and so forth. And they said, why don't you guys put together a little audition, see what you could do, and we'll base it around Popeye cartoons.
Now, this looks like a barrel to you, but it's actually... That's a head. This is to practice riding on Fiedelbaum, because he's going to be delivered this afternoon right at the track.
That's
and you'll meet him
the size
right.
of Fiedelbaum, too.
Certainly. I hop right aboard there. First you mount. That's right. Now you got the reins?
I got the reins.
Got your riding croup?
We didn't write a show like you would now, starting at the beginning and filling in and going to the end. We would start with the laugh ending and work backwards and just fill in the other stuff to get to the funny payoff. Some days we didn't have an idea of what we were going to do, and as we were putting on, he was putting on the mustache and the sideburns, and I was putting on my sailor suit. What are we going to do today? I don't know. So we'd go out and start the show with no payoff in mind, no funny routine. The empathy we had working together was uncanny. It really was.
No more horse... Oh!
Captain! We'll see you Monday, kids. Bye-bye. Captain!
There were others, Corky the Clown, with another versatile performer, Cliff St. James, who, like Bolin, did weather and just about everything else around his TV station. Captain 11, the idea was the same, fill in the time between the cartoons, or in this case, the Three Stooges, and have an after-school audience for the paying sponsors. What made Captain 11 unusual was Captain 11, the legendary Harry Fender. His years on that TV show are just a small part of a story that goes back about 100 years. In the 1920s, when radio was a novelty, Harry Fender was a star, working for Ziegfeld on Broadway.
I had an unusual talent. I'll tell you why. I'm a big guy, you know, and I can dance and pirouette and turn spin out of shape. Hell of a dancer, and I had a beautiful big voice. And that's how I could stop the show. I'd sing a song in New York and stop the show and then stop it with the dancing. And that's why I was a critic's favorite.
The story's well known, how he walked away from the stage career, came back to St. Louis for another career on the police force, and then in the 1940s he was back in show business hosting radio programs from the Chase Hotel and cutting a dashing figure about town.
I have a thing called talent. You either have it or don't have it in my business or show business. You do or you can't.
When Harry Fender started out, a person with talent went on the stage. For the next generation, it was radio. And for the next, something new.
There's another song that I've had a lot of requests to sing. And I'm glad because I really like it. I hope you like it too. If you know the words, well, sing it with me. It's called Do-Re-Mi. Do, a deer, a female deer, Ray, a drop of golden sun.
This is Susie's Playroom. Susie is Suzanne Wallach, who is still a professional singer. It was her mother, actress Ellen Wallach, who helped her get into this.
I was 10 years old when it came on. It was a great thing to do, great experience. I wouldn't trade it in. I did get recognized quite a bit, especially by kids, and the ones my age tended to really needle me, taunt me, because the show was really aimed at kids about 5 years old.
Say, speaking of songs, we just have time for our closing song, so sing it with me. It was so much fun just being here with you. Yes, all you...
Children's programs were filled with talented people, with music, comedy, cartoons, and commercials. But there was, of course, an alternative.
Today, boys and girls, on Here and There, we're going to look at a very interesting place. And as soon as your teacher, Mrs. Sally Grayson, gets her shoes on, she'll tell you all about it.
Have you ever wondered where shoes came from? Well, today, we're going to find out all about shoes because we're going to go to the Buster Brown Shoe Factory where they make them. Come on, let's go. And here I am going into the factory to watch the shoe being made.
Educational television was a combination of high ideals and low budgets. The government wanted to do with television what it had missed doing with radio, set aside channels that wouldn't be taken over by the commercial interests, but would be devoted to education, discussion, and culture.
Good evening. You've just been listening to Mr. John Rank play some Poulenc. And good evening to you, Mr. Rank. He was playing when I came in, and I didn't want to disturb you. It sounded so wonderful.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's nice to see you again here tonight.
I know. I'm very happy to be invited back. You know, usually, Mr. Rank...
All that was needed to turn the idea of educational TV into a real TV station was getting the two major universities, the school districts, the city, and the county governments, and the big corporations to agree to work together. Mayor Joseph Darst got things rolling with a committee. But no institution wanted the license or the expense of running a television station. So it was decided the community could put on a show and hold the license. Even today, the former head of St. Louis University is amazed that it all worked out.
I think civic progress, well, I can't say we were responsible for it. I mean, the cooperation that developed in educational television, I think, was the seed that gave the business leaders the idea that we ought to have some kind of an instrument for promoting good across-the-board civic activities.
School districts were now paying to support the new TV station, and facing a teacher shortage, they expected classroom instruction. They weren't, however, happy with being tied to the station's live schedule or with what they saw.
And it changed by reason of failure. I mean, we just couldn't pull off a lot of the type of educational programs that I think we had envisioned in the beginning.
Sonny Fox searches the world for interesting people, places, and things. When he finds them, he brings them before his television cameras for you to see. That's why he's called The Finder.
KETC early on was trying to go beyond simple classroom instruction. Its first really big production was an after-school children's program, The Finder.
Hi, I'm The Finder. That's not my real name, of course. My name is Sonny Fox. But I'm called The Finder because, well, I spend most of my time looking for and finding all kinds of interesting places and people and things. And, you know, my home set here is just full of all kinds of things that I have found around the world in my searching and finding. Take this Mexican mask up here, for instance. This is one of my favorites.
This special meeting of the Metroplex Assembly is now in session.
For many, the true potential of television was discussion, the democratic exchange of ideas, the technological town meeting.
Our first witness is Mrs. Jerome Spector, Secretary of the Citizens Metropolitan Transit Committee, which was responsible for the Gilman Report.
For the Metroplex Assembly series, groups of people would gather in auditoriums or private homes to watch the discussion, which was directed from the Channel 9 studios. Ratings, clearly, were not the primary concern.
At the end of Phase 1, we'll ask you to turn off your set, discuss the merits of the views you've heard, and phone in your reactions, your suggestions, and your questions.
Channel 9 went on the air in 1954, after the government freeze on television that had lasted through the Korean War.
answer the question.
If you look at that year's television listings, you see that KSD is no longer alone. But the competition is unfamiliar. Channel 14, Channel 36, Channel 54 in Belleville, WTVI. It's the only one that survived, and only by maneuvering to get onto Channel 2 and becoming KTVI. They were UHF stations at a time when most televisions couldn't even get the higher channels. They weren't even on the dial. Those who could get them were very valued customers to the staff at WTVI.
We'd go out in our cars, find the address of these people who couldn't get the signal, and in several cases, I would climb up on the roof of the homeowner and adjust the set to where I figured the antenna was in Belleville, and this would be here in St. Louis, and adjust it until they got a picture. It could be gotten, but it took so much patience. But that's how desperate we were to prove that UHF could work.
It did work, technically, but not economically. Not enough viewers, not enough sponsors, not enough money to do real programs.
In the earlier days, we used to have to fill time a goldfish bowl, an aquarium, nothing in it, not even a fish, put the camera up tight to the bowl so you couldn't see anything around the outside, put a piece of black paper behind it, take an eyedropper with milk and drop drops of milk into that aquarium. And it's beautiful. It just swirled around, and we could do that for hours. Not 5, 6 hours, but a couple of hours at a crack, just to have something on the air.
This was no match for the competition. KSD had a 7-year head start, a strong signal, a loyal audience, and real TV stars.
Grab your lunch and don't you hesitate. We're here to entertain you, so don't be late. Why? That's right. Meet your friends and hear the latest news, music, surprises. We leave it up to you. Anything
Well, ho, Charlotte.
The late Charlotte Peters was one of the most popular performers ever on St. Louis television, dynamic and volatile on and off the screen. She could belt out a song and would do just about anything for a laugh.
In fairyland, I'm known as Fairy Flo. And where I've flown, no one will ever know.
Her career started in the very early days of live television. Singer Russ David was producing all kinds of programs on Channel 5 and was always on the lookout for new talent.
I had finished auditioning one afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, about 5 or 5:30, and in walked this rather attractive young lady who put her purse down. She said, "I'm Charlotte Peters," as though we're supposed to say, "Well, where have you been?" You know.
Severin knew talent when he saw it, and he made Charlotte Peters a regular on his midday program, To the Ladies.
This was every bit live, nothing. We had nothing to work with. We did have talk-through rehearsals, maybe a half hour before the show. We'd say, "I want to do this, I want to do that." But when you had people that are spontaneous, and Harry Honig and Charlie Sherwood, the two dialecticians, and then along came Charlotte Peters. And when you got people like that, you can throw the world at them. You could bomb them. You could drop the atom bomb on them, and I think Charlotte would still be standing there. She was just indestructible and probably as clever and as talented as anybody I ever knew.
To the Ladies eventually became Charlotte Peters' own show. John Rodell was the MC. What was she really like to work for?
She was, you could get mad and scream at each other. Half hour later, didn't make any difference.
Charlotte had a temper that could put you to, she could frighten you to death. And she sounded off because of it. But that was what made Charlotte.
What a joy having you. Aren't you adorable? What are you all sitting here posing for?
Day after day, year after year, the show went on. It switched to KTVI in 1964, and when it went off the air in 1970, the Charlotte Peters Show was one of the last local variety shows anywhere in the country. Not because people didn't like them, but television, like radio before it, had changed as it had grown up, not just technically, but as a business. Just a couple of years before, Cookie and the Captain went off the air.
The reason we went off, we were sold out 7 years in advance, booked in audiences 7 or 8 years in advance, and suddenly we're gone. Because economically it became cheaper and less trouble to put on reruns of Leave It to Beaver than it did to have two guys down there, you know, running cartoons and having the audience, and somebody had to get the toys that we gave them, and somebody had to do this and that and the other thing. It became easier and cheaper and actually netted more money for the station. That's why the business changed. News has done the same thing. News that used to be the loser, but an audience attractor, has now become the moneymaker.
Our story continues from St. Louis. We switch to John Rodell at KSD-TV in St. Louis.
It was here in St. Louis that the Green Lease case was broken today, and it is here, just an hour ago, that Mrs. Bonnie Brown Heddy and Carl Austin Hall were notified that they would be held under bonds of $100,000 each on a federal warrant charging extortion. This is John Rodell. We switch you now to David Brinkley in the NBC newsroom in Washington.
We're on the phone now, believe it or not, with the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, right now, who's on the telephone. Mr. President?
Your helicopter's dead ahead of us. I'm on the port side.
We're live right now. Can you just give us your reaction, what you're seeing? We're gonna talk about it after we make the tour.
Television, even local TV news at times, seems to be overwhelmed by its own technology. All of the satellites and the mini cams and the helicopters, and yet all of this brings local TV all the way back to the very roots of wireless technology, back to the sending of the Titanic's distress signal and the broadcasting of weather forecasts, the communication of important information. And that's why the newspapers, which had already been using the telegraph and the camera and even carrier pigeons, were among the first to get into radio. Before the Post-Dispatch had a radio station, one of its sports writers had his own radio transmitter, just to send the latest golf tournament results back to the office downtown. In 1939 and 1940, the Post-Dispatch was still experimenting, this time with a radio newspaper, sending information to a facsimile machine. One day, perhaps, we would all be getting our newspapers this way at home. This world of old-time radio is all starting to seem pretty new. After World War I, technology was all the rage, and radio was part of it. It brought news of Lindy's Landing and covered the hero's welcome back to St. Louis. When two aviators set a new endurance record at Lambert Field in 1929, there was so much interest in this sort of thing that KWK's coverage was carried coast to coast. Smart promoters were now playing to the newsreel cameras and the radio microphones, and the media event was born.
Only by seeing this great industrial center can you realize the genius of the men who founded Anheuser-Busch.
Franz Laux was at the mic at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery in 1933 when Prohibition came to an end.
It is the pleasure of the Columbia Broadcasting System to bring before the microphone August A. Busch, Jr., Vice President and General Manager of Anheuser-Busch and grandson of one of the founders.
It's a great pleasure to have released the first case of beer bottled in our plant in nearly 14 years. My thanks to one and all of you and my deep appreciation to the Columbia Broadcasting System for affording me the opportunity of using their facilities on this auspicious occasion. Good night and good luck.
Just a moment, I'm going to have the driver of the first truck to leave the plant with the new 3 2/10% Budweiser say just a few words to you. Oh boy. This is the first job I've had in 6 months. I'm pretty thankful to get the chance to deliver this first note of Budweiser. Thank you very much. It's a very inspiring sight, ladies.
What made radio so good at this was the simplicity of the technology. Even today, going live on radio is nothing more than using the phone. But television, because of all its equipment, for a long time was stuck in the studio. Frank Eschen was the first to do news on Channel 5, and what you see here is pretty much what you got. For the most part, news was just something that had to be done, and not a lot went into it.
Kind of embarrassing to tell. It was a radio newscast on television. You're familiar with rip and read, where you go to the teletype machine and UPI wrote news for broadcasting rather than print. And we just rip it off and I'd read it. We had no teleprompters, we had nothing to aid or crutch the anchor people like there is today.
If film was used, it was usually for soft news, a staged event, or a celebrity interview.
I feel very close to this town, having got an early start here in my career, and I'm so happy to see that so many of our old friends remember us, and there's so many new ones among them that we're so happy to have acquired since we've been on television.
The easiest location for a remote broadcast for Channel 5 was right outside their front door on Olive Street. But on big events, television could move its cameras and trucks and cables and go live, as it did in 1949 for the St. Louis wedding of Vice President Alben Barkley. This was carried on the NBC television network, which was just starting up. Television was still, for the most part, local people broadcasting to a local audience. It was a rare event in 1951 when St. Louis viewers could watch an international peace conference from San Francisco. It was shown coast to coast and took the coordination of all of the television networks and the phone company to pull it off. KSD was there when Senator Estes Kefauver brought his investigation into organized crime to St. Louis. The senator liked having KSD's cameras there. The local witness didn't.
But I object to these television cameras. I'm not going to testify as long as they're in operation.
It's all right. They'll stay in operation as long as they want to stay in operation.
What I can only do is to leave the committee room.
Latest storm of Hurricane Betsy. You might not
in the years that followed, viewers expected and got more and better news coverage. Film crews and reporters were added to the staff. In the 1960s, the TV stations could rush film back from a breaking story like the Highlands Amusement Park fire, but they were still far behind Harry Honig's live report for KSD Radio.
Well, the main building where I am right now is on fire, and I'm going to have to cut out of here in about a minute. And to give you a quick report, the fire started in the restaurant and has gone through the main area, the entrance area, and some of the ride areas. The swimming pool is untouched.
What about over the direction of the roller coaster?
The direction of the wind, I would say, which is more or less feeding this fire, is from the southwest. The roof of the building of which I am talking to you from is now on fire, and they're yelling at me to get out of here.
It wasn't until 1975 that television could begin to consider live coverage of breaking news stories.
30 seconds. Okay.
In fact, modern television news coverage began in St. Louis. KMOX-TV was the first station in the country to replace film cameras with videotape and microwave trucks. The station owner, CBS, used the KMOX staff as its guinea pigs. Julius Hunter was still over at Channel 5 when KMOX brought in all the new equipment.
We did not think for sure that it was going to work. In fact, at that time, 3 television stations doing news in this town, that's channels 5 and 2 and 11, thought, hey, this is really risky business going into this deal of depending on videotape to carry the day. I mean, we watched Channel 5 as technicians from Channel 4 here would take a whole day to do a setup with this thing, and they were never sure it was going to work.
It did work here and all around the country, and the old days were gone for good.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll tell you, we'll fill you in right now with the latest news headlines from the KSD TV newsroom. Western European nations approved decisions by Eisenhower and Eden.
It wasn't just the kinds of cameras that had changed on television news over the years, so had the kinds of people. John Rodell was one of the few who made the transition to modern TV newsman. Before that, his job in radio and on early television had been to take what other people had written and then to sound good reading it.
Colder weather is heading toward this area.
I'd go out and do interviews, and you'd bring back your notes and give them to a writer. He'd edit the tape or the film, at that time the film, and you didn't have to do anything. You just went out and did a stand-up, and that was it. Well, they got somebody there, I forget who it was, and head of the news department, and he said, from now on, reporters do their own writing. Oh, I thought, boy. So, but it worked out all right. And that's when I was strictly doing news.
Well, good evening. Spencer Allen here reporting the 10 o'clock news, brought to you by the distributors of Falstaff Beer, America's choice for lighthearted living.
Spencer Allen was part of the new breed of TV newsman at Channel 4, which reached a turning point when the network became the owner in 1958.
I'll have details on these and other stories in 1 minute.
Okay, Doc, my glass? CBS came along and said, now we're going to have news people who are news people, and you staff people are going to be staff people, and you're going to be commercial announcers, and you're going to make station breaks, and that's about it. And that's when the glamour for the local performer kind of wore off.
Mercantile Trust Company presents KMOX-TV Election Return. And now here's Spencer Allen.
Here's the way the latest goes in the KMOX-TV election return.
Once, there had been separate news, weather, and sports shows, 5 minutes each. Now there was a single news program and anchor teams. The competition for viewers was heating up, and the newscasters were moving to center stage.
Here is Max Roby.
Taking a look at these returns as we have them at this hour, it seems that in the state of Missouri, Republican Congressman...
Well, most of the stadium, of course, is concrete. Could it have been much worse if you'd lost some more of your scaffolding?
Well, the formwork...
It was only really until Chris Condon came into Channel 5 that we were hiring news, journalistic, or I should say journalistic people with that kind of a background, where we became involved with personnel that were knowledgeable of news and journalism.
I might say that Chris was a guiding force in my earlier days. I was sent out with Chris when I first started at Channel 5 nearly 25 years ago, and was told, in essence, learn from this guy. He's the top guy in town, and he was for so many years. And that is because Chris Condon was energetic. He worked very often an 11-hour day. He also would ask tough questions, the toughest questions of anybody in town.
I feel that the sentences are unjust.
The 60s were a time of turbulent political and social change, and television was right in the middle.
They are people who are poor, undereducated, underskilled, underemployed, and uninspired. The 21,000 human beings who live on the 287 acres surrounding the corner represent 4% of the entire St. Louis City population. Only half of their homes are soundly constructed for human use. The other half are in a condition that can only be described as unsound, deteriorating, or dilapidated.
St. Louis television stations were doing more than just covering the news. In the 1960s, they were spending time and money to produce long documentaries that dug into local problems. And they began to show the St. Louis audience things it had never seen on television before.
Why did you do that?
Why, just for an infatuation.
You mean you just did it for kicks, is that it?
Yeah, I just do it just because I've seen other people do it.
When did you see other people do it?
Well, it started quite a while ago.
Realistically, I think the impetus for the production of documentaries came from the Federal Communications Commission. That kind of gave the stations a push to be more concerned with public affairs programs, and the desire to balance a program schedule with public affairs programs, not to devote the entire schedule to so-called entertainment programs.
The city at night is another world. When the sun goes down, when the evening rush clogs the traffic arteries, a subtle change comes over the city as the lights wink on.
Bruce Hayward was hosting a regular documentary series on Channel 2, Expedition St. Louis.
Because it was current then, the vast wasteland which came right from the heart of the FCC commissioners. When that was said and we started looking at each other, they were right. I will make no comment about today's television, but in those days, it's true, we were junking the airwaves.
Why do you think you're not working with your skills?
Frankly, I've had several people to tell me when I apply for a job that they aren't, at that particular time, hiring Negroes in their offices.
Local television was bringing important issues, such as minority employment, to the people of St. Louis. But the television business's own hiring record was no better than anybody else's.
I received a phone call from another employee of Stixbear & Fuller asking me to come in for an interview, that they were in search of a Negro model.
Look who shows up on this 1961 program on minority employment. Diane White, interviewed at the time as St. Louis's first black fashion model.
After having been told that the job was mine, that unfortunately I would not be representing just myself, rather I would be representing the Negro race.
2 years after this, Channel 5 hired her to be, as it was called then, a weather girl. And for the first time, minorities were not just in the news, they were giving it.
The Pulitzer Publishing Company could see equal opportunity breathing down their throats. And since they were the first to go on with television in the city, why not be the first? I began on the weekends. I was the first in the country, the second black. Her name was Seal. Her last name eludes me after all these years. She started the following weekend in Chicago. I know because we exchanged congratulatory telegrams.
More women and minorities began showing up on television. Local stations in this sort of thing were often ahead of the networks, which had been keeping a lot of people off the air for a variety of reasons.
In front of the fence and behind the banjo, we have a man named Pete Seeger, who you may have heard in some of his records. Well, he's going to serenade us while you continue your makeup.
Good enough.
But one of the most famous songs of all is about an outlaw. It was on a Saturday night, the moon was shining bright.
Folk singer Pete Seeger, blacklisted from national television, was appearing during those years on local stations all around the country, including this 1955 appearance on The Finder.
Jesse James.
Party Time, featuring Ike Turner and his Rhythm King.
It would be years before someone like Ike Turner and his music would be considered appropriate for a national television audience. But in his hometown, he was on Channel 2 as early as 1956. This show was another product of Steve Mizraini, who was the sponsor, and George Edick, who hosted and produced the program in order to promote his business, the Club Imperial. KTVI was happy to sell them the time and let them do just about whatever they wanted.
A whole half-hour show that we used to have, we would pay for that whole half-hour show $100. It was different in them days. It wasn't like it now. Used to the guy call up and say, "Hey, what you do this and that for today?" It was different. It was a different type of culture and people in them days. We didn't have to be answering to nobody, just to God.
Club owners already knew black music had a large white audience. Veteran St. Louis disc jockey Johnny Rabbit remembers when local radio stations wouldn't cross those lines.
So a station like KXLW here, which was a black-oriented station, didn't play white artists. A very rare exception they would. And a station like KXOK, basically in the up until the mid-50s, wouldn't play a black artist at all. And there were two versions of the song, like Ain't That a Shame by Fats Domino and Ain't That a Shame by Pat Boone. And there were a lot of examples of that.
Because there were so many more radio than television stations, there was a lot more variety, and the black audience and fans of black music could find their stations and their announcers, Yapano, the Rockin' Mr. G, Spider Burks, who helped pave the way for other DJs like Lou Father Times.
Spider was, he had the entire city in the palm of his hand. He was just that good. Spider had, I say, a 40% white audience. Really, a 40% white audience. And he was just the perfect announcer. He was just the perfect announcer. He was one of the pioneers. I think him and George Logan were the two greatest out of the pioneers.
Those days, the personality of really Gil Newsom, Ed Wilson, Ed Bonner, KXOK, you had jingles, you had your own jingles, some actually introductions to your show in a singing format.
The sky-high sound of KXOK.
KXOK, St. Louis, Missouri, the Don Chamber program. These are the Marcells.
Radio changed so much in the 1950s because it had to. Television had taken away so much of what it used to do. The actors and the orchestras were gone. About the only radio job left for a member of the Musicians Union was turntable operator.
At Lambert Field, 74. On KXOK, Annette Bonicello. Get your record roulette card today at McDonald's with 5 greater St. Louis locations.
Radio survived by reinventing itself and going after a growing and captive audience that television couldn't touch. Not just with music, but with the thing that started radio, people talking.
We would like to welcome Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt to our microphone, and we're so very happy that you could find time to visit with us, Mrs. Roosevelt.
Thank you.
Where do you get all the energy?
Oh, I don't have so much energy, but I manage to do what people want me to do.
There is no other city that had a radio success story like KMOX, but then there is no other city that had Robert Hyland. Those who knew him have a lot of words to describe him, beginning with unforgettable.
Bob was in command of every situation, and even if he didn't know the answer, he would pretend he knew and say, I know it can be done.
When I first got there in the mid-'70s, he was coming into work at 3 o'clock in the morning and leaving about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh, he intimidated the hell out of me. I mean, I was weak-kneed going into his office. It wasn't just who he was in terms of position or what his resume would say that he accomplished. His presence, it was like central casting had sent in a guy to be a Supreme Court justice or a senator or the head of an intergalactic court.
Determination, authority, and incredible charm all made Bob Hyland unique in the community and in the radio business. He had St. Louisans turning to his station in droves just to hear people talk.
I'd like him to tell you what he has in store for you. Dr. Weber?
Hello, Rex. I'll be glad to do that. That new program at your service, which KMOX is inaugurating, certainly is an exciting venture, and it should be stimulating to everyone.
On the next track, transcribed Ozark varieties came to you from the studios of KMOX, the voice of St. Louis.
In the early days, there were a lot of powerhouse radio stations. KSD bragged about just how far its signals had been heard, how many ships at sea had picked up its programs. People in distant places who had tuned into KSD would send in photo postcards. St. Louis radio was reaching the most isolated places in America, and some of them were just down the road. In the Old Mines community of Washington County, people were still speaking French and living off the land in the 1920s. But it was the beginning of the end of isolation. There were automobiles and better roads. And then, of course, there was radio.
That opened up the world, all right. Up until then, we had nothing but a weekly newspaper to keep up with the news. Kansas City Star. That was a paper. That was the only contact with the outside world we had, except what neighbors told us, you know.
Old Mines was now a part of a single national audience. They were listening to news and music, and the decisions about just what they would hear were being made in the big cities, not on the front porch.
It changed the music styles a lot, because before that you just had the fiddlers and the old music, and then that introduced them to modern, to country music of the time, and they started catching the news. And I think a lot of people learned English from the radio, the older people, because it was something constant.
These days, in old mines, they celebrate what's left of the French heritage at annual festivals. The rest of the time, they listen to the same music they do in Boston or even Berlin. They watch the same videotapes and adjust their dishes to the same satellites. Old Mines is part of a community that was created in the broadcasting and the space age.
The St. Louis area can be considered the hub of America's space program. For today, the eyes of the scientific world are centered on the Project Mercury capsule, which is being built here to carry the first astronaut into outer space.
Hello again, and welcome to A Pinch of Salt. We're particularly happy to have all of you here tonight because we have a dish that we think is going to be interesting, not only to all of you who are interested in good food, but to historians as well.
The first people to step into a television studio in St. Louis were exploring the unknown, and since the executives didn't know anything about how to do television, a few creative people were given the job of doing what they thought best, just as long as it filled the time.
Stars of A Pinch of Salt every time that we go on. I'm going to start the liquid for our pudding heating while I show you all of the packaged goods that we have used in our trifle tonight.
Back in those days, if somebody needed a children's show on Saturday morning, they might call Ellen Wallach, actress and artist. She'd write a story, draw the pictures, and then read it on TV as Miss Ellen.
We could take time, and that was what was so beautiful. You know, we could create something. And I guess because we were given the leeway.
We took that responsibility pretty seriously. We knew it was a powerful medium. We knew people were watching it very closely. We knew they were paying very close attention, and boy, that worries you a little bit.
You know, you're thinking that we had a plan. We didn't have no plan. We just did it.
We got 15 cubic foot box at 200, you're mixing me up, $229.95. And I'm on the sales floor tonight myself. Come on down.
Perhaps not so much a golden age of television as an age of innocence, before the money started rolling in, and no one could afford to take any chances anymore.
With no money down.
It's been a slow transformation from that time when a GM and a program director would say, gee, that's a funny idea, let's go with it, you know. Going on gut reaction to now, nothing. I mean, nothing goes on unless it is thought out, unless it's been run before focus groups, unless they do all sorts of studies and all this sort of stuff. And of course, cost.
As the television business got bigger and bigger, television became more and more a part, even a dominating element of everyday life. What's amazing is that broadcasting is now so pervasive that we hardly even take notice of it anymore. It's sort of like trying to see the forest, and you've got all those trees in the way. We are now moving out of the television broadcasting era that started in 1947. With cable, satellites, fiber optics, signal compression, the old transmission tower may well go the way of the vacuum tube. In the old days, KSD radio would start its broadcasting with 15 minutes of organ music, giving listeners time to find the signal and adjust the cat's whisker tuner on the crystal to get as clear reception as possible. Will surfing through 100 or hundreds of TV channels ever match the wonder and the magic of those very first years? By the 1960s, Russ David's Playhouse Party radio show was a survivor from another era.
How long, I wonder, could this thing last?
In the 1990s, it was an anachronism. Nothing fancy, not edited or digitally enhanced, no second chances. Just playing, singing, a bit of talk, and a microphone.
I saw you right there.
There is so little left of our broadcast history, so few things from the old days were recorded. People were too busy broadcasting, hour after hour after hour, filling time. What they did went into the air and disappeared.
Hasta la vista, vaqueros. And I'll be seeing you, Wrangler.
Well. In 1929, 29th of March, when I walked in the studio to give an audition, I never will forget it. And this is the old song that put me over, and I haven't done it in years. Oh, for years and years I've rambled, drink my wines and gamble, but one day I thought I would settle down. I met a perfect lady who said she'd be my baby. We built a cottage in the old hometown. Somehow I can't give up my good old rambling days. All the railroad trains are calling me away. Well, I may be rough, I may be wild, I may be tough and a little bit vile, but I cannot give up my good old rough and rowdy ways. I used to yodel, yodelay-o, yodelay-o.